Welcome, Exile, to a new series on my channel where I will cover the whole story of Path of Exile and what is actually going on in there. Without wasting too much time, let's get right into it, shall we, Exile? The 7 playable characters are 7 exiles from Oriath to Rayclast. Each of them has committed some sort of crime in Oriath that was considered exile-worthy by the High Templar Dominus, the current leader of Oriath. Criminals of different levels were sent to Rayclast for many years, where most of them wouldn't survive or would be secretly experimented on by those interested in thaumaturgy and virtue gems. More on that later. The 7 exiles, or playable characters, were each sent for different reasons. Marauder comes from the Karui, one of the many peoples of Rayclast. Since Oriath is ruled by the Templars who considered innocence as the only true god, believing in the Karui gods is enough to send one to Rayclast. Templar was part of the Templars Order, the same one that is currently ruling over Oriath. Why was he exiled then, you might ask? Well, Templar stood by his ideals instead of blindly following the Templars' rule. "You were once the chosen of God," says Dominus to the Templar before the exile. Witch was exiled for witchcraft. She was under constant attacks from the people of Oriath. They burned her home and drove her from the village. She got even. Years of constant bullying finally backfired when the witch murdered the children of the citizens, for which she was sentenced to exile. Witchcraft was additionally considered impure and therefore directly opposing the will of the righteous and pure god Innocence. Shadow was a part of the Guild of the Night. Think of it as the Dark Brotherhood of Rayclast. He was exiled for, murder. Even more so, he was exiled because he was sold out by his employers who tricked him and led to his capture. Ranger is a huntress, a woman who strongly believes in the nature's birth-given right to live one's life the way they wish it. She was caught stealing, although it's not entirely sure as to what she was stealing, as well as poaching, which was banned in Oriath. The Duelist was once a warrior in the great arena of Theopolis, and by far the owner of the greatest backstory in Path of Exile. He was insulted by a lord, so he challenged him to a duel. The duelist won, and he was called a murderer, thus earning the exile to Rayclast. Back in Oriath, there were those that referred to me as the Wonder Child. Sion was the daughter of corrupt nobles in Oriath. Access to high level of education and great economy of the noble class made her a Wonder Child. As it so happened, the nobles tended to keep it within the class, so her marriage was arranged. On her wedding night, she went on and murdered her husband, therefore earning the exile to Rayclast. She's also the only character that's not unlocked from the very first launch of the game, as you have to rescue her from the Scepter of God in Act 3. She's also the only character with only one Ascendancy class. We'll get to the Ascendancy classes in Act 3 video. After we choose the character we want to play, we are sent to exile to Rayclast. We wake up on the shore of the Twilight Strand, and not a minute passes until we see the effects of the cataclysm that hit this land. Tons of undead, mutated animals, and destroyed landscape. We arrive at the gate of an encampment, but it's blocked by a magical barrier and seemingly guarded by a huge undead brute, Hillock. A horrifying result of the cataclysm that happened roughly 300 years before we arrive on Rayclast. After defeating Hillock, the barrier is lifted and we can enter the town of Lion's Watch. In town, we meet several NPCs. Nessa, a shipwreck survivor who uses her medical skills to aid the wounded passing through the town. Bestel, who claims to be the captain of a wrecked ship called Mary Go. He also shows a huge interest in poetry, but, spoiler alert, he never finishes his poem about us. Tarklai, who has decided to be a sort of a leader and a protector of the Lion's Watch. A former jack of all trades, and now an exile who helps new exiles arriving in the town. After we first meet the NPCs, we are tasked with retrieving the medical supplies from the tidal island and killing the undead necromancer Cadaverous the Defiler from the fetid pool in the mudflats. When we arrive in the mudflats, we find strange glyphs in the nests of mutated and aggravated roas. While exploring the mudflats, we find a wall with sockets that fit the glyphs perfectly. Placing them inside unlocks the submerged passage. When we inform the NPCs about it, we are congratulated and sent on yet another mission. Tarklai asks us to kill the Dweller of the Deep, which resides in the flooded depths in the submerged passage. Nessa will instruct us to go to the prison, as the only way to the forest is through the prison and Prisoner's Gate. Continuing through the submerged passage will lead us to the ledge, where we first encounter the Goatman. We can also find Kuduku there, a pagan totem god, also known by the community as the RNG god. From the ledge we go to the climb. Towards the prison we find a unique boss Goatman, the Fawn. He is holding a woman captive, and after defeating Fawn for the first time we can free the woman Navali, who will later appear in every town as well as in our hideout. We'll talk about Navali in a different video which will cover the Prophecy League. After entering the prison we can come back to town where Nessa will task us with defeating the undead warden of the prison, Brutus. On our way we find a strange door named Trial of Ascendancy. Completing the trial will progress towards unlocking the Aspirants Plaza in Act 3. We will cover the labyrinth in the Act 3 video. On our way through the prison we meet a woman named Piety, reading a journal in the warden's chambers. She mocks us and promptly runs away. We arrive at the exit to the Prisoner's Gate, guarded by the aforementioned Brutus. Before our eyes stands a huge brute, an effect of thaumaturgical experiments of one Chevron of Umbra, who will cover more extensively throughout the story. Defeating Brutus will lead us to the Prisoner's Gate, where we meet Piety again. As before, she blocks the passage and runs away before we can follow her. We have to find another way. Exploring leads us to the passage to the ship graveyard, where we find Captain Fairgraves, a pirate cursed to be bound to his ship. He asks us to find a slave girl who stole his Allflame and run to the cave. He wants to die to be free of his curse, and the Allflame will allow him to do that. When we bring him the artifact, he goes full on "no hard feelings, dude," and explains that in order for the Allflame to grant life, it must take life. Fairgraves wants to take our life to save his. After we defeat him, we can continue to the Cavern of Wrath, and come back to town and tell Bestel about Fairgraves. Nessa will warn us about a cursed siren residing in the caverns, Merveil. Merveil was a beautiful woman living in the city of Sarn. She once caught the interest of a skilled duelist and champion of the Grand Arena of Theopolis, named Daresso. Daresso gave her the Star of Rayclast as his marriage proposal. Later, the amulet's thaumaturgical powers twisted Merveil's mind into a monster. Daresso left her to travel to find a cure and seemingly never returned to her. Nessa tells us that defeating Merveil will allow us to go to the forest through the caverns, as she is the last opposition on the way. During the fight with Merveil, she transforms into a horrible mutated siren, and we learn from her notebook that the thought of her lover Daresso leaving her and a broken mind led her to hide in the caverns and to lure sailors to their deaths. The caverns are filled with her children, leading us to believe that she did not only kill the sailors, but also slept with them before. Killing Merveil after the transformation will open the passage to the southern forest and begin the Act 2 of the story. Welcome back, Exile! Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my content. With that in mind, I'll let you go on with your day.
Still sane, Exile?